All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Optiv's first ever live multi-stream discussion that we're hosting both on LinkedIn and also on our Source Zero Twitter page. We're happy to represent Source Zero, which is Optiv's cybersecurity research and development hub. We cover everything through that program, from tool analysis, threat intelligence, application security best practices, all kinds of red team research, all sorts of interesting technical stuff. Today, I'm your moderator. My name is Curtis Fechner, and I'm an engineering fellow here at Optiv in our threat management practice. So today we're talking about our Source Zero Con event, and one popular subject that's been consistent throughout our Source Zero community is cyber threat intelligence. So talking about things ranging from just current security trends, vulnerabilities, things like that. Also more significant threats, vertical specific threats, excuse me, for various industries. Today, during our discussion, we're going to talk about the concepts around threat intelligence and also apply these in a few different ways, talking both about offensive security as well as incident response and how threat intel can influence all of this. So today for this event, I am joined by three people here at Optiv in the threat management group. First up, I have Nick Hyatt. He is a practice manager in our threat intelligence, in our incident response practice, leading our Global Threat Intelligence Center, or GTIC. He has a lot to share on how to build a strong CTI program based on his real-world experience working in the field, and also how to effectively engage stakeholders throughout the business when building out a CTI program. Next, I have Emily Lee, who is a consultant on Nick's team. She has a dynamic background in her career as a former intelligence analyst for the United States Army. She has her unique perspectives from working in the field on how to apply threat intelligence in various ways, how to do analysis, and also how it intersects with incident response. And finally, last but not least, somebody who likely needs a little introduction from a lot of the information security community these days, my fellow engineering fellow, Matthew Eidelberg, who, unlike the rest of us, took the smart approach to information security and had some fun and does the offensive security side of things. So adversary emulation, enemy perspectives. He's going to add some of that enemy perspective as we converse here and talk about CTI and all the other fun things that we're going to get into. So let's get this going here. The main theme of our event that we're working on this spring here has ended up kind of organically becoming cyber threat intelligence. A lot of people who are participating this year for us really wanted to talk about intel in various ways and how they could apply it to the information security program to make it more effective. So we're always working with new intelligence trends, new threats, historic threats that have reemerged. Sometimes we're talking about ephemeral data and technical feeds of information, and sometimes we're talking about intelligence concepts that are a little bit more enduring. So starting things out a little bit here, we're going to go with Emily. We have a good understanding of automating technical intelligence, but how can the security community realistically make use of that enduring intelligence information to support incident response?
Thanks for the intro, Curtis. So to answer your question, automated technical intelligence can best be used as a way to enrich indicators and alerts. For example, during an incident, your responders will be using detections to determine next steps. That enduring automated technical intelligence will provide context on those detections that will save time and help to direct the investigation.
Awesome. Nick, building off of that, what kinds of intelligence information do you feel is more essential for incident response teams and the actions that they're performing?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think realistically, when you're doing incident response, what you're looking for is contextual information that is going to be timely and relevant. So, in the middle of an incident response, you're going to have your responders dealing with a lot of different things all at once, and they may not have that capability to go out and do that exploration for that context around the indicators that they're finding. So, when you're getting that information over to your incident responders, what you're looking for is things that are timely, relevant, actionable, stuff that helps to prevent the bleeding, right? You're working on triage. Mm-hmm. After the incident, you can take all of the amalgamated data and start looking at trends and things like that. But during an incident, you want that immediate capability to give context to what you're seeing.
Awesome. So something that we deal with a lot when we're doing IR is that we work with a lot of organizations who have playbooks and things like that, right? Repeatable processes that they want to execute on for handling incidents fairly consistently. How can threat intel fit into the maintenance cycles for keeping that up to date and relevant?
I can take a stab at this one.
Sure.
And I think really what you want to do is think about your intelligence in the context of driving that incident response. So as you're refining a lot of the playbooks and things like that you have, how does intelligence fit into that? So very specifically, when you're refining that RFI process, that request for intelligence process, is there something that you need to update based on that?
So pairing off of that as well, from an offensive perspective, Matt, something that I'm a little bit curious about your take on is how would you, as an offensive security professional, help drive those same blue teamers towards improving their processes? Would you leverage intelligence, or is there something more that can be done?
So definitely leveraging intelligence is very important, but it's this type of fine balance. You often see where too much information can sometimes be a greater downfall than zero information, especially when you talk about any type of logging or event monitoring. Having too much information almost creates a fog and kind of disrupts and not give you accurate data and enough pinpoints. Too little, and you don't know what you're looking at, what you're doing, or what's going on. And it's that balance, and it really comes down to baselining your environment, understanding everything, and looking for the abnormal things that stand out. And I mean, we talk about this a lot, but employee and human behaviors, that's like the biggest downfall. Being able to understand your business from an organization, how the trends and behaviors of individual organizations, whether from HR to marketing to even your IT team, how do they flow and operate? We've seen attackers try to blend in using the living off the land tools, LOL bins, and trying to identify those types of things become really hard if you don't understand the standard use or the traditional business cases that your company or organization uses those services or tools for. So really much that tightrope of finding that balance between the two.
Yeah, Matt brings up a really good point here in that too much information is overload. And one of the core things that we like to talk about when we're building intelligence programs is that just plugging intelligence into your processes isn't going to solve anything. A lot of what intelligence is going to do is enrich what you already know. And if you don't know your environment, if you don't know what behavior looks normal and what behavior looks abnormal, that's absolutely spot on, is that no matter how much intelligence you have, it's not going to make a difference if you can't tell one from the other. And so what intelligence can do there is that once you have that baseline in place, you can then enrich all of that behavior that may be abnormal. So if there is an actor in the environment and they are doing something that looks like what your IT team does, what is that signifier? And that's where enriching things with intelligence can help.
Mm-hmm. I would also say, on just a dovetail off of that, is making sure that you don't just focus from threats coming inside the environment, but threats that start inside. Especially with a lot of attacks these days, if an attacker that's motivated, they have infinite time and resources, they're hitting your perimeter, your outside environment, they may not be able to get in, but they notice that you have a contract position for someone in the mailroom. All of a sudden, you've just given them access to your environment. So looking at it from that perspective as well, once again, balance.
Matt, I'm curious. Sometimes it might be painfully obvious if the defenders you're working against are kind of running through a playbook or something. Have you ever seen any cases where it's just painfully obvious that they're trying to work through that process and it's almost making your job easier?
Yes, quite a few times. What I would say is that a playbook is great, but you can't plan for every single situation. If, like those choose your own adventure stories, maybe I'm dating myself when I was a kid, you can't plan for every single situation or attack vector. Having major points, I almost like to say when I talk to clients, having your playbooks, but also having an understanding of these major points that you need to get identified. So whether it be get the data, incident response commander, perform certain triage tasks, that allows a lot more flexibility to adapt to the situation you're seeing. An attacker, if they start to see that you're being caught or something's catching up, they're getting whiff of, hey, we're not so stealthy anymore, or they know we're there, they could change their tactics. Often what we do is sometimes even deploy a whole other C2, or if we know that something like that, we like to call it sending a fox through the house, so to speak, make a lot of noise on the left side of the network, and we go to the right side of the network.
Go ahead. Sorry,
no,
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah,
I was just saying. So having that, not rigid, focus on have to do A, B, C, D, E steps can actually be more successful than, less successful than just saying, hey, these are the things we got to get in order to make sure that we're successful in detection and closing the loop on this threat.
Yeah, and what we've done to formalize that is introduce a concept that we call uniformity of work, independence of analysis. So when you're building your playbooks, when you're building your SOPs, when you're building the way that you are going to respond to incidents, what you do is make it so that the process, the end state, is going to be the same, so that you will have the same final product, but you give agency to the responder to react organically to whatever the actor is doing. Because again, the human element is, as Matt talked about earlier, both on the blue side and the red side, is going to be something that comes into play because you have humans on both sides of the keyboard. So if you build that structure to provide that uniformity of work, you will then be able to give that agency to the analyst and give that independence of analysis.
Yep.
I'm just sitting here trying to think of a reaction because I'm like, yeah, I agree. Keep saying the stuff I want to agree with. So what about the concept of risk and threat intelligence? Nick or Emily, both of you I know work a fair bit in terms of incorporating risk into our threat intelligence analysis. What's the value there?
So Nick and Matt were starting to hit on this a little bit, but incorporating risk into threat intelligence is how we make CTI relevant to security teams. Without incorporating risk, security teams would have no way to filter through intelligence reports and discern what was relevant to them. We try to simplify this for security teams by analyzing the common risks within each vertical and identifying the most relevant threats based on those risks. Understanding your environment to include the vertical you operate in, the systems you're running, and the assets you need to protect allows you to filter through that crazy overload of data that Nick and Matt were discussing. Once you understand the risks within your environment and compare that to the likely threats within your landscape, you can make educated decisions about security strategies. Another aspect to this is to understand your organization's risk appetite. Just like an organization should know their risk appetite for financial endeavors and investments, organizations need to identify their cyber threat risk appetite and understand what risk the organization feels must be eliminated, what can be mitigated, and what needs to be tolerated.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and Matt can probably talk a little bit more about this. But if from a corporate perspective, if you've decided that you will accept the risk on a certain vulnerable, application or tool or something like that, and having that documented, that's going to play into how you respond to something. So, I mean, we see that with some of the vulnerabilities that have been coming out recently. Especially around some file transfer tool sets, is that threat actors act on these things and will use those to then pivot internally. But if it's an accepted risk, then how do you handle that sort of response? And that's something that you need to take into account when you're building out incident response plans.
Yes, and just to kind of go off of that, a lot of times what we find is the discussion is that if we accept the risk, what can we do? A lot of times it's a business decision to accept that risk, but at the end of the day, as a security operations professional, you have to still make sure that, you're covering all your bases. So how do you balance that? And a lot of it comes down to mitigation versus detection. So if you can't mitigate it and you have to accept it, how do you kind of laser in those sensors so that way you have real time, right down to the second, and accurate detection? So it's almost like you're going to over focus on that while still balancing getting that right data. So sometimes we've seen even just like putting up additional walls, segmentation around this area. We kind of call it the gray zone. Can't really, everything we accept here, but we won't want to put anything sensitive there, so to speak. And that does have a lot of value if something all of a sudden, an abnormal amount of traffic, to go back to that example, starts generating from that area of the network. You can start to say, hey, we need to go investigate and maybe pull one of our IR playbooks.
And that's a really great point about mitigating that risk, is that if you do accept the risk on something, then putting walls in place around that to help reduce the actual transient risk to the rest of the environment helps. And when you're talking about processes in your playbook and things like that, I think realistically cutting down on the time to identify whether something is a threat actor isn't maybe the necessary or the correct course of action. And I think when you're looking at building processes, what you are looking at building processes to do is be efficient about your work. When you're trying to identify whether something is a threat actor or not, you're more into that's more of a post-analysis kind of situation. Because IR is incident response. You're trying to stop the bleeding. You're trying to get that triage in place to prevent the immediate threat. So you want to have as many processes as it takes, right? You don't want to have compiled processes that jump all over the place. You want clear and defined uniformity of work that allows you to then say, oh, this process isn't getting me the answer that I want. Let me jump to this other process, which is then where we respond to things. And then identifying whether something is a threat actor or not. I mean, realistically, a threat actor versus an actor that's just going off of opportunity, you're not really going to be able to tell that initially. And I don't think there's particularly a process count that's going to get you to that answer, because those are two different concepts. Attribution and efficacy of an IR process, I think, are two different things and can be their own conversation in itself.
You guys are killing me. You guys keep answering questions before I can even ask them. I was just going to ask to further go into what Matt was talking about when it comes to assumption of risk and mitigation strategies. What else can offensive security pros do to kind of help bridge that gap on taking what sort of the research-driven aspect of threat intelligence analysis and turning that into a practical implementation to prove how to mitigate something?
So who was that directed to?
More for you, Matt. Sorry.
So a lot of times it's really kind of subjective to one major component you haven't kind of talked about, which is the type of threat actor group and the type of business model you want to emulate. We often get a lot of asks that, hey, we see APT, XX, while we're concerned about it. And they might be targeting just maybe medical fields or, all that information. So it makes it harder to apply to finance. So that's one of the big things we see as a balance, is that, there are a lot of these big APT groups and their trends are to target certain types of organizations. They have a lot of behavioral characteristics and trying to extract the important parts of it to help create a simulation for a different line of business or different whole entity can be very challenging. So what we try to do is almost take a polymorphic approach, where we take one known entity and then the current one and kind of merge them together to create a new baseline, a new narrative, and then execute off of that. And that kind of then provides a lot of value, especially for clients, because if it's one that's well documented and they have partner procedures and detections in place, they already have the breadcrumbs to then help them learn and start tracking it down. It's almost like giving them a blueprint or, breadcrumbs, if you will, to start catching up and learning how to defend against it. So that's a great hybrid approach. It's kind of like a purple teamish way of executing it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you actually on the subject of purple teaming. Have you seen a lot of success there in terms of helping people understand how to actually mitigate those kinds of risks?
Oh, huge. I would say, especially more and more with traditional pen testing, not kind of hitting that mark of a threat intel perspective and be able to apply that. Purple teaming is one of the greatest steps into this type of world and space because of that collaborative nature, where you can provide from that offensive perspective that closest you can be emulation of a real world threat, but also have the knowledge sharing, education to be able to replay, break it down, and dissect the attacks, the vectors, the different TTPs being used in an educational type of focus. A lot of times we would see, for a while, companies would buy just 12 of each product, 12 EDRs, 12 ACLs, whitelisting tools, and everything else like that. They don't. I mean, they're all great, but when you stick some of them together, they don't all play together well. And especially if you invest a lot more just in buying products rather than tuning, teaching your team how to actually hunt for it, how to use these tools properly, you're going to have a huge difference there. So when we kind of come in for these purple teams, focusing in on understanding your environment, understanding how a threat would work, what a threat actor for someone who has that malicious type of focus would do in your environment based off of everything that's there is very key, because then they can teach and simulate those types of attacks, see where you're being successful in detecting them and preventing them, see where you aren't. And then that becomes the kind of like the big major meat of the whole type of operation, which is getting from not seeing anything and preventing it to seeing it and stopping it. That bridge between those 2 points, that's a lot of valuable education that most tooling or off-the-shelf products cannot solve for. That's a human thing that you have to just constantly invest into.
And Matt brings up a great point that I wanted to touch on, and it's a way to actually use intelligence to enhance red team operations and things like that. Is that he brought up the point that something that may affect the financials vertical may not be as effective in the healthcare vertical. So what that means is that when you get into building your request for information, your request for intelligence, and say, instead of saying, oh, hey, what threat actor is working in this vertical, let's emulate them. You can say, what threat actor attacks this technology that we have accepted risk on? And are they also active in our vertical? And what does that attack profile look like? And then you can go to somebody like Matt and say, hey, let's emulate this sort of attack. We want to see if we can defend against that. So it actually is more efficient to build that kind of request and get more for your money when you're dealing with red team operations and even purple team activities like you were just talking about. It's having that understanding of, this is the risk that we've accepted, this is how this functions, this is how we want this attacker to function. That's going to be more efficient all around for both sides.
Awesome. I'm going to kind of shift up the topics a little bit, maybe a little though. So I wanted to move in a little bit to the less technical side of it in terms of threat intelligence. So really, I was curious, Emily, from your perspective, knowing what you do here day to day, do you have any strategies that you tend to favor when it comes to aggregating, verifying, validating, disseminating the less ephemeral, non-indicator based threat intelligence products?
Yeah, thanks, Curtis. So our team provides a variety of intelligence reports, including daily and weekly intelligence updates, advisories for high priority incidents, as well as the vertical and organization specific intelligence products that we've been discussing. Our team aggregates a combination of internal data that we collect from our incident response engagements, as well as data from proprietary sources and trusted external sources. In keeping with the intelligence lifecycle, once we have collected and processed our data, we utilize intelligence fundamentals to add analysis that to that information and turn it into actionable intelligence that can be disseminated to stakeholders. Intelligence is an inherently subjective field, however, so my best advice for organizations without their own CTI program would be to identify a few trustworthy sources for intelligence that avoid FUD or fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and instead focus on providing useful intelligence about relevant trends, tools, techniques, and patterns affecting your organization. I will say that this does take time to identify sources that provide relevant intelligence products, and it will not be the same for organizations across the board.
So extending off that as well, something that I've consistently seen over the years, and I think, Nick, Matt, you've definitely done a lot of consulting engagements in the past where I've heard these same arguments. There's this recognition that threat intel is sort of theoretically valuable, but it's hard to find practical guidance out of CTI research and analysis. Why do you think that gap exists?
Matt, do you want to go first? I mean,
it's all yours. I think we're going to say the same thing
on this, right? Yeah. So I'm going to be blunt about this. A lot of threat intelligence research exists in a vacuum. A lot of threat intelligence research is based off of accumulated, amalgamated information that doesn't reflect real world capabilities for companies. So I think in some aspects of it, taking what you can and filtering out what is relevant to you by going back to some of the topics we talked about before, understanding the risk that you have, understanding where you are internally is going to be really important for getting through that. We've said it a lot, that ephemeral data. So yeah, that's what I think.
I was just going to echo that statement of, it is that vacuum type of issue here. And sometimes when organizations hear that or look at that, there's a lot of an investment in there. And especially, unfortunately, they don't look at it and see it directly right away as a massive ROI. And that's where a lot of the hesitancy comes from. But I want to stress there is tons of value in it. It's just trying to convince them that the ROI is coming. It just may take a little bit of time. There's no quick get rich schemes. There's no quick ROIs in this case.
Yeah, exactly. As Matt said, there's a ton of value in it. You just have to take the time to figure out what that value is. And that requires a lot of internal reflection.
Yeah.
So I'm going to throw this one out for everybody just to kind of wrap things up as we conclude this little party. In terms of intelligence trends and perspectives, are there any interesting adversarial techniques, research trends, any other interesting trends or findings, just odd, crazy stuff, anything that you want to talk about that's kind of front of mind for you all that you're seeing?
I can start this one off. One of the things that we really find interesting and observable is that a lot of these actors go back to the same tried and true methodologies because they work, right? Everybody loves the new hotness, the new, developed tool. But when you have, for example, externally facing file transfer applications and it keeps working, why would you not use that, right? Why burn new tool when old tool worked just fine? So, one of the trends that we see is that a lot of these actors keep going back to the same methodologies because they work. So one of the things to focus on is what historically have these actors used and how can we protect against that? I mean, it's a good way to help bolster those defenses.
Based on that, our Intel team, the GTIC, has developed a list of prioritized software and services that organizations should prioritize in terms of patch management, hardening, asset inventory, and visibility. And this list serves as an easy way to monitor trends in threat actor behavior. So we do keep that up to date based on those common threat actor trends that we're seeing.
Awesome. Matt, any insights you want to add as we kind of wrap this up?
I will say, I mean, to the point about the latest and greatest tools and stuff, a lot of times I actually will kind of pivot and say not just tools, but more so the techniques. A lot of research and tooling comes out constantly around old techniques. EDR and Hook, use that as an example. We're still seeing tons of different tools come out, and they're very effective because they're using, very rooted into almost the attack playbook, TTPs. It's the new techniques that you often see. They kind of spike a lot of interest and fizzle out very quick. You see that a lot with new LLL bins and stuff. So going back to the basics that work, to kind of dovetail off what Nick said, is very much true in a lot of tooling and stuff. Oftentimes, it's very unfortunate, but a lot of products, they still don't catch a lot. What they do is, if it's very popular, they'll try to signaturize the entire framework. And then that just takes the author about, maybe a new update or patch, a week or two, no sleep, and a bunch of monsters to figure out the signature and go around it. So at the end of the day, the root cause of the root TTP in there is still not being properly addressed.
I love that insight. On that note, the powers that be behind the scenes are saying, wrap it up, dude. So on that note, Emily, Nick, Matt, thank you so much for this discussion on talking about incident response processes, threat intelligence, offensive security. If you're interested in hearing us talk more about these topics, please join us for our Source Zero Con virtual conference that takes place on optiv.com June 21st through 23rd. So coming right up here, we've got over 40 virtual talks in 3 days, topics around AI for red teamers, vulnerability management, incident response processes, security culture, you name it, we got it. We're going to leave you with a sneak peek of what you can expect from it. And thank you for joining today's LinkedIn Live.